You know what? Screw it. Let's just go up to, let's see, 3 Fusion Bore and 2 Maceration Laser. How many cards does this come out to? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What the hell? What just happened? What just happened?
It's my understanding you hold false beliefs about a certain card.
Okay, what the hell's going on?
You know very well what's going on.
Who the hell is—
Silence! You shall suffer for your ignorance against a balance card. You will play this last line of defense deck for Encounter 1, and you will stay through the entire tournament, whether you succeed or fail. That shall be your punishment for calling this card broken.
What? No, not a chance. You are not making me play this.
Silence! You have not earned the right to pick your deck. You will suffer.
But there's no way to guarantee whether this thing is good enough to actually—
Silence! If this card is truly as broken as you say it is, then there is a guarantee that it will do well. It will win the event if it is broken. But if it is not, it will fail miserably. And when it does, the community will see that you cannot analyze cards and will turn away from you. Enjoy your suffering.
Okay, I guess we're playing this. Yay.
3 weeks later.
Well, this is interesting to say the least. Albeit, man, I really cannot analyze cards. Albeit I still need to make an analysis of this meta now that this is going. Alrighty, off the Discord to see who I can find to help me with this. Hello there everybody, and welcome to another meta-analysis video, or more accurately, the first one since I think the Energon Invitational? I don't remember. This whole pandemic has screwed up my mind. Anthony joining you once again. I almost missed that cue. And recently, Bayformer's first officially sanctioned tournament, Encounter 1, as it's being dubbed, wrapped up, and by recently, I mean like a week and a half ago or something, I don't remember. Long story short, the event just wrapped up, and I was a participant in it, so I at least have a gauge on what was being used, and hopefully I can give some insight into the format going into the future. That being said, if you've watched any of my videos where I analyze Transformers cards, you'll know that I am overly prone to hot takes. So to hopefully help avert that, I'm joined by a couple of people. Bilmu, who is the mastermind behind pretty much everything Bayformer card related, and Tank Hunter 48, who has been a collaborator in other videos before and also placed 3rd at this event, despite him not thinking he would be able to reach that, but that's a whole nother issue. Gentlemen, how you doing tonight?
Doing well. I'm glad to be introduced as the underdog, basically.
Well, I mean, you kept saying that going in, and yeah, and I should also mention, Bill placed 5th, I placed 6th, so it was a 10-person event, I should also mention that, but
yeah.
All jokes aside, let's get into some stuff, because there was quite a bit that came out of this event, in my opinion, and going forward, it's going to be interesting. But first, we need to talk about something serious. Daring mother***ing escape. Now, there have been some discussions happening in the community, I can speak. Some people think that Daring Escape is the problem, some people think that Springer was the problem, and Encounter 1 used a ban list that was the standard WotC ban list as well as Springer. Daring Escape still showed up, and it placed 2nd. And both me and Tank can tell you about that experience, because I had to play it round 4, Tank had to play it in the losers finals, I believe it was.
Yes, I played it basically for my shot at 2nd place against Dutchy in the tournament.
Yeah, and basically this was not your standard Daring Escape build. It used a combination of Anticipation Engine and Datapad and Prowl to untap 4 times in a turn and basically win on turn 3. And while that's acceptable by Yu-Gi-Oh! Standards, let's not get into that show because, yeah. So, let's talk about this. This Daring Escape deck, we thought Springer might be the issue, Daring Escape still shows up. And now this has proven the point where Daring Escape can, when it shows up, it's degenerate. At this point, even though there are counters in the format, we saw Brian use Security Checkpoint and Turbo Board to take this thing out. Regardless of that, does Daring Escape deserve to be banned? I personally think so, but I'll leave it to you two to discuss this so I don't take up the video anymore.
So I'm curious what, well, actually, I'll speak first, and then I'll kind of get Bill Moo's take on it, just because, in my kind of opinion, even though I understand that the Bayformers Discord is made up a lot of people who are ATP players and ARC players and everybody else, we have a pretty good mix in the Discord. Daring Escape is one of those cards that, like, is kind of odd, because it is, like, with Springer, of course, it's really, really easy to trigger, but Dutchy made it in a way that it felt cheap the entire time, because it was kind of, at least when I played him, he abused it, or what I call abused. I can't necessarily say it's abused, but he took advantage of a lot of game state and rule things that WotC had put into place. Like, a card that's flipped for battle is technically not in your scrap or in your deck. So one of the games, he anticipation engined a lock on target, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
Lock on target.
And just bold 4 every single character, and then he flipped all of his battle cards and Daring Escaped, and that felt awful.
That wasn't just one game. That was every
Yeah.
game. It happened to me when I got 2-0'd, so you're not alone in that regard.
Yeah, so there is something to be said about, like, the way WotC left the game that makes Daring Escape's win condition a little bit too viable, and especially with a lot of the cards that we got during Wave 4 that are like lock on target, where if you can anticipation engine it and then just keep untapping the same character and just bold out your deck, that's it. That you won the game. But I can't necessarily say that. Well, I feel like Daring Escape is a little bit too much, but I'm still, even though I hate it myself, I'm on the fence about it getting the ban hammer yet. I'd like to see if it continues to make showings and continues to get those top bracket scores in the next couple of tournaments. But otherwise, I say leave it be for the moment. I'm leaning towards being among the people who are like, get rid of it for good. It doesn't deserve a place in the game. But alt win conditions, I think, are something that the Transformers TCG should take advantage of. It's just making sure that there's not a way that makes it feel awful for the other person who's trying to also win.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I certainly have opinions about alternate win conditions without spoiling too much, and also not spoiling the point which I'll arrive at. But as a content creator, I think most content creators are a bit of a mad scientist, where they anticipate that a bad interaction can occur with a card, but they kind of want to see how it operates in the wild, especially with new conditions on the field. And so I think my position when I was organizing Encounter 1 was, yes, I've had bad games against, many bad games against Daring Escape in the past, but that was in the Wave 4 meta, or was in the Wave 5 meta. And then knowing that, Springer was a component of that, if we ban Springer, which is a terrible card, and I personally can't believe that Wizards ever released that card in the first place. Also kept it off of the ban list for a long time because it was a character. I think it's terrible. I could talk about that for hours. I kind of wanted to see what kind of ingenious decks people could put together in a tournament environment where there's so many other cards present in the game. And we got that answer. And I think it's important to see those. I think it's also very important that deck did not win the tournament, because I think that
that's true too. Yeah.
I think that I would certainly have felt bad if Dutchy had won the tournament. I don't feel bad for Dutchy coming up with the deck. I just think it's not good for the game state generally. I certainly would have congratulated him, and now would have banned the deck immediately for Encounter 2.
Yeah, but also you got to take into consideration there the fact that Brian was able to counter it effectively. He was able to, I think he pulled System Reboot out of his sideboard. I don't remember fully, but he was able to pull out Turbo Board. He was anticipating that, and not a lot of other people. In fact, I don't think anyone else was. So that says a lot. I mean, he did lose to somebody during the Swiss round, so that says the deck isn't completely unbeatable, and it wasn't Brian, I should mention. But the fact that it was able to go on that hot streak at the end and make it all the way back up to the grand finals and was only shut down thanks to a combination of Turbo Board and some of the other hyper-specific counters, that should say something about where its power level is overall in the meta. And I've said this repeatedly, just because a card has counters doesn't mean that it shouldn't be banned. And also, with the discussions happening of, like, should Security Checkpoint be banned, you also got to take that into consideration when you start discussing, okay, is Daring Escape going to get banned? Because Sec Check is a pretty decent counter to Daring Escape, and if that's not in the format, Daring Escape is left a bit more unchecked, and who knows what could happen.
Well, Sec Check is a counter to Daring Escape if they're playing upgrade heavy. The issue with Dutchy's deck is that he had 6 upgrades in total in his 40-card deck.
Right.
And everything else was actions. So playing a Sec Check is not going to help you generally unless you know he's got that anticipation engine or data pad in hand. So it's a problem. And it kind of, at least for me, it boils down to I should not have to tailor my entire sideboard to fighting one specific deck.
Right.
But I can't necessarily say that there isn't a counter to Daring Escape, because if you just smack the Daring Escape characters hard enough, you can get through. But that fringes on you being able to hit hard enough.
Right. So, anybody else got anything to say about this?
Unless you want me to segue, I have a segue.
I mean, I can make a quick statement about the state of Daring Escape. Certainly for the upcoming ATP BFA crossover tournament, Encounter 2, we've decided to adopt much of their existing ban list, and they have cards that they have on their ban list that we don't necessarily on our default, like Sec Check, PTT, Daring Escape, and we'll likely adopt those for that event only. As far as the default list for BFA afterwards, we're still debating that.
Okay, so yeah, crossplay is a whole nother issue, and we'll discuss that towards the tail end of the video. But you mentioned Peace Through Tyranny and Security Checkpoint. I'm just going to bring this up as just a side note. Do they really need to go in BFA only formats? Because let's think about this. Sec Check, there were some discussions that were happening on Discord where, I don't remember what it was, but somebody said, like, its maximum power level is up there with Peace Through Tyranny, but it has a much broader range of how strong it is, and we were just talking about this a little bit in the context of Daring Escape.
Yeah.
And Peace Through Tyranny, honestly, I didn't see a whole lot of it, even in decks that could have taken advantage of it, like Sharks. Hey everybody, Anthony jumping in here quick, because I actually made this mistake later on in the video. Sharks cannot use Peace Through Tyranny because they cost 4 stars. I don't know how I missed that, but yeah, that's just a note to make note of in regards to this whole conversation. Sharks cannot use Peace Through Tyranny. Moving on. Peace Through Tyranny wasn't there, and I played Peace Through Tyranny in my deck. Yes, that just got censored out. Deal with it. But I only played it in my deck for double orange because I was going straight aggro. So, I mean, of course, Sky Shadow could come back in the future and cause a need for it to ban. But if it doesn't come back in that context, does Peace Through Tyranny and Security Checkpoint really need to go?
Sec Check, I've made this argument for a while. Blue has kind of been on the dying end of deck construction. So, like, I feel that if you're going to ban Peace Through Tyranny, just because Sec Check relies more on both your and your opponent's deck construction than PTT does, I think Sec Check is fine to help kind of give that little extra nudge to blue decks against orange decks. And then PTT can get banned because, yeah, if you know how to use it, you know how to use it. So that's kind of where I lie with it, because I think it's fine because it relies on both your and your opponent's deck construction and your willingness to potentially scrap one card from your hand or two or more.
Right. So there is that obvious blowback that you could potentially take, and also you might be still willing to scrap a couple of upgrades, but then boom, your opponent doesn't have anything. So Bill, you got anything to comment on that?
I mean, both cards are some of the most efficient cards in the game, and it just spikes their power level so high above. It's just the combination of the pips and I think I hear people in the Discord say on the regular that they would play Sec Check and PTT even if they had no abilities because of the pips.
Yeah, Farrell especially has been saying that a lot.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
play Handheld Blaster and Improvised Shield in solid color decks, and they're off kilter of what you generally want those kind of cards to do in those decks. Like, why would you want a tough 1 armor in an orange deck? That's not going to help you.
Yeah.
Now, there is the argument to be made about the rise of blue-black and how Bold 1 could help you get the extra pierce, but letters and numbers, too much.
So
and it certainly helps. It certainly helps that blue-black deck, output more damage. Not as much as say potentially a bold orange deck can, but just getting the guaranteed damage is good work done by that card. So there's definitely an effective. I would say that handheld blaster's utility is actually far greater than improvised shields generally is.
Yeah, even if I do jokingly say that playing improvised shield or handheld blaster onto a character is heresy, I do understand like the utility that at least handheld blaster brings, just because again the blue pierce argument. So. If nobody else has anything to say on this, I think we can go ahead and move on to start talking about some BFA stuffs, because let's be real, that's what everybody's here for. How is BFA going to impact the meta? And starting on the character front, there were really 2 standouts that I personally think showed up in this event, and that is Exhaust and Crashbash. Now, for those of you who may not be as familiar with Exhaust, and I am actually going to pull out the binder here. My God, I am not prepared. Where the heck is he?
Who could have guessed? Hawk isn't prepared.
This is on the regular.
You just need to find the page that is smoking.
Boo!
Now I gotta put Patrick in the video. Thanks for that. Anyway, so Exhaust, first off, he is a dual-faction Decepticon mercenary. Yes, this means he can use Opportune Offensive on himself. It's awesome. He's a 5/13/1 in alt mode, a 4/13/2 in bot mode. He's 8 stars. His alt mode has a car melee. He's only melee in bot mode. And his alt mode reads, at the start of each turn, both yours and your opponent's, you may do 1 damage to this. Each turn, this has +1 attack and +1 defense for each time he has taken damage or has had damage counters moved onto him during that turn. And it's for each instance, not each point. So if you somehow take like 3 damage from an energy transfer, you still only get +1/+1. As for
3 damage from an energy transfer, bolt of lightning, 2 from a marksmanship.
Okay, so this is a weird thing with marksmanship. Now, you can't marksmanship Exhaust while he's in alt mode, but if you get marksmanship in bot mode and then somehow flip to alt mode on the same turn through something like a swerve, you do get the +1/+1 bonus because that is an instance of him taking damage. He keeps track of how many times he takes damage in both modes. He just only gets the boost while in alt mode. So just wanted to clear that up because some people were probably thinking that that made 0 sense. Moving on. This was kind of
beautiful red wheels.
I figured that was going to come up. Wheelgate's a whole nother issue. I'll probably take a minute explaining it. But going into the BFA things, one of my questions regarding Exhaust was he going to serve as like a big beat stick? Was he going to serve as something else? Or was he going to fit into the meta in general? And there were 2 decks in particular that used this. Brian's first place Smoke on the Water deck, and Vangelis also used a Exhaust deck that I think used Axor and Night Racer as well. So Exhaust had 2 showings out of 10 placings, and if I remember correctly, the only reason Brian was flipping Exhaust was because of Cliff Jumper. He was using Cliff Jumper with him, so he got that card draw. But Exhaust in alt mode specifically, I think, is the reason that he's seeing play, but I'm going to open this up to you two because you probably could give more analysis on this.
So, in terms of exhaust, you cannot talk about exhaust without brutal conditioning.
Yes, that was actually... I'm going to interrupt you here quickly.
Yeah.
Actually, no, you can go... Actually, no, I'm going to ask this. Is brutal conditioning or playing exhaust without brutal conditioning a mistake? Because we got to take into consideration the fact that Brian was playing brutal conditioning and Vangelis was not. And I've played exhaust decks without brutal conditioning and it falters pretty hard. Now, admittedly, in the redemption match video I posted a couple of weeks ago, I did use exhaust without brutal conditioning. That was just because Briscoe turned into an axe murderer that I won. That had nothing to do with exhaust. But from what I'm seeing, exhaust without brutal conditioning is a mistake, but maybe you guys are seeing something different?
So I think that without brutal conditioning, exhaust definitely needs to see a deck that is more heavy on Cayman crashes and what's it called? Precision fires and magnetic dysfunction rays. Because without the ability to damage himself outside of his own self-ping that he has in alt mode, you're not going to make the most use of exhaust. But with the thing is, with brutal conditioning, you basically take him from an 8-star character to a 9-star character, and then for the small price of pinging him 4 times, you get +2 attack, +2 defense, and +2 health. And to be quite fair, that's a lot. Like, the amount of upgrades you would need to play to get him to an equivalent state for, like, oh gosh.
In terms of his stat line?
Yeah, in terms of his stat line, would be pretty ridiculous. So I definitely think that exhaust with brutal conditioning is very, very powerful, but I think it has kind of its upper limit set in stone because you are going to have to damage exhaust, and that damage has to go somewhere. So, you know, even if you want to transfer it off to your smallest character and then just yeet them out, that's only going to take you so far because exhaust is still susceptible to pierce, even though he has a high defense. Yeah, he's still susceptible to really high attack values if you can get out like a reckless charge and a grenade launcher or a fusion bore or whatever. But the reason why, especially Brian's deck, from my experience playing it, was so harsh was the combination of untaps, the quickness that he could get brutal conditioning on exhaust, and then oh gosh, what was the last thing that my brain said?
The draw power from Cliff Jumper or something?
And yeah, the draw power. So Brian made, and to be quite fair to him, as much as I hate him and Dutchy, because they're both like, man, I feel sorry for you, and I'm like, shut up, you won. Don't feel sorry for me. He constructed his deck really, really well. Like, I cannot fault him for that. Like, nobody really put 2 and 2 together that exhaust is a car in the mode that you want him to attack out with. Like, and that's a pretty big deal. So just continuing to talk, he can untap and do all this stuff and damage himself, and he can get pretty crazy if he's got brutal conditioning. And in Brian's deck, where he was almost entirely blue-black and almost guaranteed to flip double blue, yeah, he gave exhaust a lot more sticking power than I think people were going to give exhaust credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's at least the gameplay standpoint. But Bill, you obviously are responsible for this massive hunk of a set. In terms of exhaust from like a designer's commentary and seeing what he has started to become in the meta, how do you think those start to compare? Is he like meeting your vision for how he wanted to play out, or do you feel like he might still be misused in some ways?
Well, I think that the standings in the tournament really sort of showed, sort of the ways that you can play exhaust and the sort of the, I would say the wide breadth of how the character itself can be played. And I think that's a bit of a strength of the character, honestly. And I always knew that exhaust could be played well. Mm-hmm. And I always knew that exhaust could be played, less optimally. And we definitely saw it. We see that on a day-to-day, where I think easily the first month that exhaust was available, you saw exhaust die many early deaths.
Yeah.
to put it mildly. I think it's testament to Brian's ability to play that character so effectively. I think that's a testament to how strong that card can be, but also how unstable it is. And I think there are definitely strategies and decks that can exploit exhaust's vulnerability in order to really sort of hinder him, even with brutal conditioning on the board. I've been in many games where I've been able to stuff exhaust from being able to effectively do anything.
That's how I managed to get my single win in against Brian. Was I stuffed exhaust really early before he could get brutal conditioning to really start going, and then it forced him to kind of ask himself, do I ping exhaust now? Because he was at like 9 health and he had only pinged exhaust once, which basically meant if he's going to ping himself those 3 more times, he's going to be sitting at 3 health left when brutal conditioning triggers.
Yeah, and I actually had a similar situation in my game 2 against him. I got 2-0'd, but turn 1, I went first. I was using Omega again, as I've mentioned previously. I swung in for like 9 damage, and that forced him to pivot off into other options. So there are ways to beat it. It's just you have to be prepared, and you have to have an understanding of what the game plan with exhaust is.
And and that's one thing that I said about Brian as well, is that he has that kind of plan out in advance. Like, he knows, if exhaust is going to get hit, what do I have to do next? So, and that was one thing that I really applauded Brian for as well, is his ability to change his strategy very quickly and not rely on exhaust to do everything for his deck. Because once you start relying on that one character to do everything for you, that's where you start to hit a brick wall and you can't move past it.
Right. And speaking of pivoting into other strategies, the other character aside from Exhaust and Cliffjumper that he used was Crashbash, and he is the other breakout character, and Tank also used Crashbash. Now, if you're not familiar with Crashbash, and this time I have it in front of me, no digging in my binder, he is a 4-10-2 in alt mode. He is a 4-10-1 in body mode. I know there are probably some people who got traumatized by Wave 5 that hear the words body mode and are starting to panic. Relax. It's not as bad as some of the others. He's a beast in melee in alt mode, just melee and body mode. He's a 6-star. Don't panic. It's fine. His body mode is when this does attack damage to an enemy without KOing it and you flipped at least orange-blue, you may move that damage from that enemy to another enemy. Now, I'm going to interrupt this here by saying, in my matchup against Brian, I heavily misplayed game 1 because a thing with Countdown is that if you can get damage onto him, somehow he's dead. And Crashbash is a premier counter to that because he can just move damage straight on. I tried to eliminate Crashbash early, and that ended up screwing me over in the long run because I didn't realize Brian's deck was straight blue. And because of that, he was able to take advantage of alt mode, which reads, when this attacks and flips a number of orange icons less than or equal to his defense, this gets +2 until end of battle. What does this mean? You have a bit of an offensive powerhouse with a 7 or 8-star character in a blue deck, so that's pretty good. Of course, that's just base level analysis. Tank, you were playing this guy. Anything else you want to add in there?
Yeah, so my deck that I ran kind of the classic 3-wide Titan Masters deck, except I pivoted from using Quake in my main board to Crashbash. And unfortunately, one of my shortfallings was that I didn't have enough black to really, pop off with Horrible. But yeah, Crashbash is incredibly strong in alt mode. You can be a blue deck and you're just hitting for 6 every single time. And you put an Energon Axe on him and he's hitting for 9 every single time. So Crashbash has a level of consistency with that attack trigger that I don't think people are sleeping on anymore, especially after the tournament, seeing that 3 people ran Crashbash in their decks. But like, it's definitely not just something that. Oh gosh, my brain again stopped working. Come on, buddy, catch up.
Put in Jeopardy music while he's figuring this out.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that people are going to turn a blind eye to anymore, because they're realizing that Crashbash is a legitimate threat in a blue deck, and then in an orange-blue deck, he gets that little extra utility in body mode if you need it. My deck, again, I had a couple construction issues that I realized a bit too late on. I realized I played Recon System because I like Recon System, and I realize now that I probably should have played like Fuel Cache just to get the white, or Pincer Movement maybe, yeah. Because I was running Villainous Spotlight in my main board, and then Mounted Missiles was in my sideboard for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Crashbash is just incredibly good, and that's about all there is to say on it. Like, his ability to just punch out in pretty much any deck just puts him ahead of the pack, because he looks small on paper, but then you get to that, like, oh, you can run him in a blue deck and have a consistent 6 attack. That's nothing to sneeze at.
Absolutely.
And Brian also made very good use of that, because his deck was Exhaust, Cliff Jumper, Briscoe, and Crashbash, which I think has been said. But Briscoe was literally just there to absorb, or Crashbash was literally just there to absorb hits. And that's all he did in Brian's deck. He was there to take hits and then dish them back out, and he did it well.
Let's be real. The only reason that he was able to do that is because of the power of Lord Briscoe.
Oh gosh, yes.
Anyways,
the power of 3 extra health. But yeah, just to put it as bluntly as I can, Crashbash was kind of a sleeper hit going into it, but I think coming out of Bayformers or Bayformers Encounter 1, people are going to start playing Crashbash a lot.
Yeah,
because I would say his value is very much on par, if not slightly above the Bull.
Yeah, the Bull. So yeah, that's the gameplay perspective. And Bill, I'm going to ask you the same questions I did Exhaust. From the design standpoint, do you feel that people are using him as intended? Do you feel like he's being used in some weird ways that are, acceptable within the base idea of the card, or do you feel like there's still some misuse going around? What's your take on that?
No, I think Crashbash is performing exactly as I expected. As far as I was also playing Crashbash during the tournament,
right.
And
yes, I trounced you in the first round.
I know. You're playing blue, and seeing blue triple-headed Quake Titans. Actually seeing that do well was actually a good sign. I was actually very appreciative of that, because classically we've seen lots of heavy orange triple-headed Quake, and just seeing blue do that well was a really good thing for me to see.
Absolutely.
I think and also I think my as good as Crashbash is, and as good as Crashbash is for taking out decks like, there are definitely decks that he has problems with. One of them being Sharkticons.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And watching Sharkticons, pick that deck apart was both discouraging for me as a player, but also very encouraging for me as a designer. So.
Yeah, Sharkticons are just an annoyance.
We'll get back to sharks later, but for
eventually.
Now, I want to talk about some other miscellaneous BFA breakouts. So Brutal Conditioning we've talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
It showed up once in that winning Exhaust deck, but it did show up another time, and I have Teletrain open here. I'll have a link in the description to the tournament details on Teletrain, so you can take a look at this for yourself. It was the Zombie Prime deck that I don't remember who used it, but Zombie Prime with Brutal Conditioning isn't a bad idea either. I mean, he's only melee in one mode, but it gives a bit more buff to a character that is generally a support piece. So Brutal Conditioning, let's just do a speed round here. Quick takes on Brutal Conditioning and how it's impacting the meta.
Very powerful. I think its impact on the meta is very, very obvious. Just play melee characters with any kind of self-ping, and you're off to the races.
Right, and I think, Bill, you've discussed this before on Discord, where you wanted to give melee the identity of just taking that damage for boost, and Brutal Conditioning, I think, is now the poster child of that. And is that something you were kind of hoping for with the design of BFA and all these melee supports?
You know, the funny thing is that when I first unveiled Brutal Conditioning, I think people were very underwhelmed by it. They were basically going, "Oh, it's only a +2, only +2 all stats. That seems kind of low." And I was always boggled by that, just because, especially on the defensive end, where +2 defense makes such a huge difference. It goes much farther than basically any other stat in many different scenarios. You know, you could definitely say that, +2 attack isn't that big of a deal. It was definitely a sleeper for a really long time, and I always thought it had a lot of potential. But yeah, I'm glad that the melee identity has really been accepted by the community at large, and most people, I would even say people that are, I guess, inclined to be somewhat misaligned with our direction, actually really enjoy what we've done with melee.
And also with the melee thing, like I've admitted this before, that when I started diving into this stuff, I was heavily opposed to direct damage. Like, this stuff is like completely shifted my view 180 on that stuff. So incidentally, it's kind of helped me in a way become a better player. And speaking of melee support, Anglemoss Surge had 4 different deck appearances, and this is basically a better Reckless Charge for melee characters. And
oddly enough,
anything that can give a +4 boost is not gonna be ignored. I mean, Reckless Charge has been looked at a few times. Grenade Launcher is the poster child for it. So with this combination of Brutal Conditioning and Anglemoss Surge, are we bound to see a possible dominance of melee characters in the meta going forward?
I think yes. If you look at the 2 of the top 4 decks, mine and Brian's, both took serious advantage of the melee characters. Even Champion's 4th place Sharkticon deck was all Munchkin Sharkticons.
Right, and he was playing Anglemoss Surge in that, so there is that to take into consideration.
Yeah, so I definitely think Bayformers is going to very heavily shift towards a melee-oriented playstyle. And I'm very interested, especially for Encounter 2, considering that's ATP crossover, to see Dinobots and how, Dinobots in this melee environment are going in an ATP Bayformers melee crossing environment where Dinobots already want to run mixed, and we have all of these really incredible melee things that go for Dinobots. They're going to be interesting, to say the least.
Absolutely. And Bill, I'm going to pose the same question again here. Anglemoss Surge fitting into that identity of melee. I know you've already answered this for the most part, but is Anglemoss Surge in particular living up to that expectation, or do you feel it could possibly be a little underwhelming, especially compared to the power level that Brutal Conditioning offers?
It's really kind of funny how often the pip color comes up as an issue or a stumbling block in someone's deck. Right. I personally watched that blue come up at very opportune times, and really sort of Anglemoss Surge is really good when I have it and I'm ready to use it, but geez, it keeps coming up at the wrong time on the battle flip. And and that's actually exactly what I would want. So I think the thing that was kind of surprising is there's 2 paired cards. There's Anglemoss Surge, and there's also Whipped into Shape. I think Whipped into Shape is still a sleeper, and I think hopefully we'll see more of it upcoming in decks.
Hopefully,
I think Whipped into Shape just needs the right construction to go with it, I suppose. You're gonna want to look for that super high defense orange build to put Whipped into Shape into.
Yeah, if we get some melee tanks in the future, I mean Demolisher's a melee tank, so maybe he could take advantage of it. So there's that. Then we have my personal favorite battle card from the set. There's been jokes running around how if I set a secret action, it's bound to be a Turnabout Snare. Now, Turnabout Snare, I want to make this perfectly clear to anybody who's not familiar with these BFA cards. Turnabout Snare flips all attack and all defense, including boosts from upgrades and actions. This is potent as all hell, but it is not unbeatable. We've been having these conversations about, do you play Turnabout Snare in this situation? Do you play Sab Arms? Do you play End Hostilities? And this is really something that I've kind of studied a lot because I play this card a lot. Turnabout Snare is best in a situation where you're going up against somebody with a low defense and is just like pumping juice into a character through stuff like Grenade Launcher and Fusion Bore. Then you have Sabotaged Armaments, which is better against high defense characters, where that gap between the attack and defense is lower in order to shut down their weapons without unintentionally giving them stuff or stuff like that. Like against Demolisher specifically, Turnabout Snare is not the best option in some cases, especially if he has like a defense and an attack boost. It could go pretty badly. As for End Hostilities, that's when you want to bring this out when you're facing something with Bold. Like for example, I played Power Punch in my deck primarily because Bold really just powers through Turnabout Snare, because Turnabout Snare only affects those base stats and stats from upgrades and actions, not stuff from flips. And Hostilities completely shuts that down. So it's an interesting dynamic of which secret action do you want to be playing and what do you expect to be going up against. And we've had some discussions in the Discord, and Techno said this a few times, where Turnabout Snare should only hit the base stats. My argument against that is it has its strengths, yes, and this is something that Bill has also repeatedly said, but when it fails hard. So if there's anything you guys want to add on to that, I feel like I've hit most of it, though.
I mean, I'm half in agreement with Techno, because I do hate when, like, you know, I play down a Grenade Launcher, and then it's a Turnabout Snare, and I just wasted that really powerful upgrade for literally nothing.
And my counterpoint to that is Sabotaged Armaments does the same thing, basically.
True, but Sabotaged Armaments doesn't, like, destroy my entire attack.
Fair enough.
But there's things to be said. I'm on, like, the median line. Like, I can see it only flipping base values. I've seen how powerful it is and how it can be scuttled flipping combined attack and defense values. So I'm still waiting to just let it go and let it ride and see what the meta looks like after people start using it a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Like, as an example, Brian didn't use Turnabout Snare at all. I don't think so. No, he did.
Checking.
Oh, he did. He had 2. Never mind.
I
had 2.
Two of them. Yeah, there were 5 appearances. I know I played 3 because I love that card. Let's see. Bill used
it's
2.
in Four-Headed Crashbash. It's in mine. It's in Brian's. It's in...
I think there was one more deck that isn't on Teletran that used it. I looked at all 10 decks. I should mention that.
I was about to say, Evangelist's deck is not on Teletran. I noticed that. I was interested to see what his looked like, but it's not here.
So, and then Bill, if you have anything you want to add in regards to Turnabout Snare?
I think it's exactly where I want it to be, as far as where it's sort of arrived to. Currently, and I've made this argument before, it kind of fills the spot that Force Field has, where, there's going to be lots of different types of attacks that either get under the radar. Many times I've had somebody play Turnabout Snare on me when I was playing Alpha Sentinel. I would see it coming and play something like Emergency Barricade on its alt mode and go, sure, flip it on me, do it.
Exactly.
And that's kind of the place where I wanted it to be. Even when I was witnessing plays in Encounter 1, that came up quite a bit, where Turnabout Snare basically removed 2 attack from the incoming attack. So it didn't make, like, there are a lot of instances where it made 0 difference. But there are definitely instances where we saw, like, some 10 wasted attack, and I'm like, kind of like Force Field.
Mm-hmm. Again, it's in that same echelon of Sabotage Armaments and End Hostilities, and you said it yourself, that's a good place for it to be. Speaking of good secret actions, Tetronite Microlining. This is a blue icon secret action that gives you +2 defense, and if you have an armor equipped, you get to reduce your opponent's pierce by 4. So I was watching the One Shall Stand, One Shall Fall podcast, or rather listening to it, and they were talking about how all these designers have been doing these various things to combat pierce, and this is another example of it, and I think it's one of the most solid ones that we have in the format, just because it's so accessible. I mean, a lot of decks are playing Bashing Shield. I mean, you can cheese this out by, as much as I hate doing this, playing an Improvised Shield. And the Pierce 4 negation, it's balanced enough where it'll take a hit on some decks, but other decks that are able to churn it out won't necessarily be able to get or won't necessarily be affected by this. If there's anything you guys want to add on that, though.
Yeah, I think that the combined need of like only getting that pierce reduction if you have an armor is good, because otherwise it's just +2 defense. So, and that was something that my deck I ended up figuring out I was struggling with, is like I did not get enough armors to actually make use of Tetranite as the games crawled on. So that was just something I had to learn, is like, you know, if you're not playing a useful amount of armors, how potent is Tetranite going to be?
Yeah, and that's a question that actually I'm going to kind of phase into, directed at Bill here. Tetranite fills that same void as Stable Cover, where Stable Cover gives you +1 defense and just completely eliminates Pierce, whereas Tetranite gives +2 defense, but it only reduces Pierce by 4. So designing Tetranite, you had to be taking into consideration the fact that it runs adjacent to Stable Cover, and was there like, I'm assuming there was a worry there about would this overpower Tetranite, would Tetranite overpower Stable Cover? Was that, I'm assuming that was a concern?
No, I was basically staring at Stable Cover the entire time I was designing Tetranite.
Yeah, I was going to say, I could read into that card and be like, this is the evolution of Stable Cover.
It really is, and I wanted to make basically double up the power of anti-pierce into a deck. I was also looking at Blade Flurry a lot when I was designing Tetranite, and I thought, yeah, basically what we need these two cards to come together in a way, and that's where Tetranite came from.
Gotcha. Okay, so another interesting note, and I know Champion did this, but I'm not sure if Mega Klutz did this in his deck. I remember playing against this round 1, but Shield Crash with Judges, because the one strength of the Judges is that they're able to build up a pretty ridiculous amount of defense, because both Clementia and Deliberata have that base 2 defense. They get a +2 bonus from generally Aspect of Laughter or Aspect of Doubt. And then they also get those defense boosts from the Litigious Tentacles and the Ancient Security Tentacles. You Shield Crash that, boom, you're all of a sudden a 6-base character, and Shark decks are orange, so that seems like a pretty good play. Now, I will admit, I didn't understand Shield Crash when I first saw it, and I'll throw this question to Bill. Do you think this was kind of like the pinnacle use of this card? Do you feel like there's still some unexplored space with this?
That was the number one use during the design process. Is that desperation move where the Judges are the last ones on the field, but they also they've had the entire game to build up their upgrades, and so they need some sort of clutch play, and that was where Shield Crash came from.
Okay, that makes sense. Speaking of clutch plays, Lose the Battle. I know me and Tank are both very high on this card. Woo! It is a weapon recovery in a secret action, and it has a green pip, or a green icon, god damn it. But it's only if you have melee characters, and this is playing into the melee discussions that we had. Like, with melee seeing an uptick, this is a pretty underrated card. Again, it only had one main deck appearance, and I'm 90% sure that was Tank's deck. I'm pulling
That's
back
me.
for them. Yeah, so Lose the Battle. Do we start to see an uptick with that, with the uptick in melee?
Potentially. I think that there's a good chance that people are going to start throwing it in as a one-off, because it's good, period. If you've got a Fusion Borer in your scrap, you take it back. You got a Energon Axe in your scrap, you take it back. If you have a Master Sword in your hand, you take it, or in your scrap, you take it back. So I think personally, any card that recovers weapons from your scrap, especially on a turn that's not yours, so you have some time to set it up if you know it's in your hand. I think that people are going to start playing Lose the Battle a little bit more, at least as like a one-off card. I think there are decks that can make use of it as like a 2-off or 3-off, but yeah, as a one-off card, I think it's excellent in any melee deck.
Absolutely. So, Bill, Lose the Battle, again, same design question. Actually, I'm going to change this up slightly. Are you a little disappointed that Lose the Battle isn't seeing as much attention? Because, again, there are people in the Discord that have recognized its power, but outside of that, you'd think at least a couple of people would have picked up onto what this thing is capable of.
I would say I'm disappointed. This is something I kind of expected. A lot of people see what could be. I mean, this was partially. I would say this was partially intended by design, where I anticipated that people would look at a secret action, not see any immediate benefits for that secret action as a flaw of the card, where it's like, well, this isn't really helping me survive, so why would I play it, right? When the real benefits come over the next turn, right? And I think, and this is me kind of forecasting a bit, I can see people potentially picking up on it a bit more once more weapon armors start appearing in the game. Where, okay, well, maybe I get a weapon armor in my hand, and that'll help me defend for the next turn, especially if they're defensive minded. But I mean, I always believed in the card. I was a huge player of a Trigger Happy back in the Wave 4 meta. It's still one of my favorite cards in the game. I still look for methods to get that card into decks, just because I love that that utility is so good.
I tried so hard to make Skytread and Trigger Happy and Wave 1 Flame War work the entirety of the time between Wave 4's drop and Wave 5's drop.
Yeah.
So much time spent into getting Trigger Happy to work. And then people were like, just swap him out for Mudflap, and my deck became like twice as good. So
yeah, and one of the beautiful things about Trigger Happy and the sort of ability to select weapons is that it really opens up deck design, where you're not necessarily throwing in 3-ofs for every single weapon. Maybe you're making it more into a toolbox, where you have two energon axes, you have two sturdy javelins. You just have that much more room in your deck to diversify based on different situations, and that opens up more decision points, and that's beautiful.
Like, to kind of wrap back around to Master Sword and how Master Sword can be used with that, just plonk down a handheld blaster, throw down your lose the battle, recover your Master Sword, and next turn you're putting it down. That's an entire strategy right there that then gets that handheld blaster out of your hand and back into your deck pool instead of a valuable weapon that's better utilized elsewhere.
Right.
Right.
So, yeah, that's lose the battle. So those are really the big BFA breakouts I think we are definitely starting to see emerge as clear favorites in the format. There's a couple of enigmas, though, that I want to talk about. The first being Sharks. Now, Champion managed to pilot this to 4th place, and there was another Shark deck that was piloted by Megaklutz. But it's interesting. So Sharks they're extremely difficult to wrap your head around because they play unlike anything we've really ever seen before. Now, we have seen decks that are kind of okay with stuff going down. I mean, every Quake variant plays like that. Anything that uses a Battlemaster plays like that to an extent. But Sharks, that's kind of their main strategy. Take the hits, come back, counter-swing into vulnerable characters, and then just have the judge there to support your draw and just build these tiny little, whatever you want to call them up, Oompa Loompas. Let's just call them Oompa Loompas because why not? I mean, that's basically what they are. And then just, recreate Jaws Transformers Edition. But there are some pretty noticeable weaknesses I noticed in my matchup against one of these Shark decks, and I'm just wondering if you guys are noticing anything as well with these things, because I'm starting to wonder if Sharks are actually going to be a sustainable strategy going forward.
I will always say that, being able, especially because you pull them back untapped, fully healed, there's the possibility that they survive the next attack and they go on and make another attack, and they're good in that way. But the one strategy that I picked up on that I'm still curious to see how it develops is the play between Sharkticons and Quake. Champion, he was very much oh, the Sharks have the advantage. But me, as the person who was playing Quake, I was like, no, I think the Quake has the advantage because I'm pinging off your judge every other time I take out a Sharkticon. But with Sharkticons, really the thing is just smack them. That's it. Uh-huh. If you can exhaust the other person's Pit of Judgment real fast, it completely neuters their strategy.
Right, and I think a valuable resource to combat this is direct damage. Again, I went up against Sharks round 1. Having that residual damage with countdown allowed me to get to my direct damage cards, slowly burn the Sharks down, kill multiple Sharks in a turn, and then, that forces the Shark player to be like, okay, which Sharks do I bring back? Usually it's an open and shut case for them bringing back Biter, but once you start eliminating multiple of them at the same time, they're like, what do I invest my resources in? Do I get the untaps with Chomp? Do I get the resource recovery with Peck? Do I get the card draw with Gnaw? Do I get the bold with Biter? What do I do? And yeah, that's really there's a thing that I noticed. Hank, you were saying?
I mean, there was one point in my match versus Champion where he brought back all 3 of his Sharkticons in one go and dropped his hand. He's like, okay, here's 6 cards. I'm bringing back all of my Sharkticons. And boom, 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 boom. And everybody attacked out. And I was like, what the hell just happened? I spent so much time killing them, and they're back.
Yeah, and this is where I'm going to bring Bill in, because considering the fact that you aren't openly panicking about that maneuver being possible, I'm assuming that was a design intention as a way for Sharks to kind of like pivot around certain decks that could just instantly smash the Sharks when they come back.
It was definitely intentional in design that somebody should be able to strategize exactly when they reappear on the battlefield. There was a game I played when I was a kid that you might have played. It's called Othello, and the marketing slogan around that game was, it takes a minute to learn, but it takes a lifetime to master.
Oh, that game.
And I feel the same way about Sharks. I don't believe that anybody, even tournament players that are playing Sharks, have entirely wrapped their minds around how Sharks can be completely optimized. And just because there's just so much you can do with them. I mean, even Champion will tell you this, because he told me plenty during the tournament. He's like, I don't know if I understand everything that Sharks are capable of, and I don't think anybody's entirely cracked that nut yet.
And who knows if anybody ever will, because like the deck composition of a Shark deck is so weird. Like, you don't really want to go blue just because they're gonna die anyways. You're gonna go straight orange, but then it's a matter of how many green and black icons do you splash in there to get your untaps with Chomp off? How many whites do you splash in there? Because you're probably not going to be using Biter's ability in alt mode that often, but it is an option you have early on in the game to start pressing some damage early. So that actually makes a lot of sense. So any other comments on Sharks?
I mean, they'll continue to be supported, and honestly, I think I would have been disappointed if Sharks would have won the tournament, just because I'd be like, well, they're obviously too strong. But especially if a person piloting them isn't necessarily that well versed in them. I expect Sharks to do much better in future tournaments. And per the Quake problem, there are some pretty solid counters to Quake that exist in the meta. It's just that.
And there's always the tried and true strategy of Unga Bunga, you're dead.
Yeah.
Unga Bunga, stick beat.
Pretty much. So that was Sharks, another enigma I want to talk about, and this is kind of something that's been hotly contested on Discord. Now, I ran a version of this. Legendary Void, who created Wave X, who created the rules of disengagement, who's also working on a Shattered Glass set right now, he also ran a deck. But there were two different versions. So I was running a straight orange build that was taking advantage of the fact that Omega was a tank. You could throw a composite armor or a ghost shield onto him using Stuck on You. Just let him be a tank, get some residual damage, and then just smash stuff in the face. Whereas Legendary was a more, kind of how I originally pictured during the Omega Supreme Files and that whole fiasco, where considering how he wanted to take as little damage as possible, you play him in a blue deck and just take 2 damage and move 1 back and that kind of stuff. But my deck placed 6th, and admittedly that was kind of due to an unfavorable matchup in round 4, thanks Daring Escape, and also me not understanding how to fight Brian's deck in round 2, I think it was. I definitely would have done some things differently had I known going in what his kind of, main overall strategy was. And Legendary placed 1 below me at that same 2-2 record, And again, I've said this repeatedly. This was something I was worried about going into this format, whether could be a game wrecker. I'm starting to openly question that, and I don't know. Tank, you might be biased in this regard because you just have a propensity to lose to this a lot, assuming I'm using that word correctly. Then again, I have the same issue with Captain Omega. So, as somebody who plays it, I think it's in a okay state. It's not the best state, but Tank, I know you have your opinions on this, so rail off.
I'm actually not going to talk too much. It is very oppressive feeling, especially like, you know, I'm in a blue deck. Oh, I'm gonna hit you for 8 Pierce 2, and it's like, okay, I'll take your 2, and I'll actually take 1, and then you'll take the other. And I'm just like looking at it like, what, huh? Why? Like, I spent all of that time and got nothing. So I think there's something to be said about it going up against like low power decks that may make it a little hard, like my Daytona deck, which is a riff on Wreck-and Rule. Oh, I think it's Kevin. Yeah, I think it's Kevin. Kevin's Crazy Concept Corner. It was his deck that I kind of ripped for my Daytona deck, and I see that one having a horrible time against Omega because it relies on Pierce entirely, and they're going to hit you for probably 3 Pierce 3, which means Omega's going to take 2, and your tiny little man of a race car patrol, sports car patrol, is going to take 1. And in those kind of matchups is where I feel that Last Line holds an infinitely powerful edge. But like the thing is that Last Line against an orange deck is where I feel that the balance starts to tip, because once you can hit a really high attack power number or just a really high attack, that's where Omega's bounce back ability isn't going to matter that much.
Yes, exactly.
And then of course there's also something to be said about, like, I know you're playing Last Line, why am I not playing Bomb Removal Protocol and getting that move damage to just go to Bomb Removal Protocol? And that's because I'm just stupid. There's nothing else to it.
Yeah. So the point about it doing well against those weaker blue decks, but not as well against those high-powered Octane orange decks, I feel like this is kind of like my current view state on Last Line of Defense. Is it's sort of that meta equalizer where if the format starts to shift way too far into that realm of blue Pierce, Last Line can come in and just go, Ghost hit in the corner, you have done a horrible, horrible, horrible deed. Don't come back for 3 months. Let the other people have their fun. And I feel like if it's in that place, it's actually not the worst thing in the world. But I really don't know exactly. It's just an enigma. Like, it's just fascinating to me, probably because it has permanently traumatized me. But Bill, from a design standpoint, what exactly were you intending with this thing? I've never really asked you that.
I mean, first off, it's not horrible. It's promo Omega Supreme.
Oh my God!
Damn it! No! For the record, if you ever join the Bayformers Discord, anything stupid that happens on that server is probably my fault. Anyways, you were saying.
Can't say one thing without somebody making it a Transformers reference. Oh, that's horrible. No, this is horrible. Post picture of Transformers card.
Anyways, so back to the topic at hand.
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of pride myself as a Last Line of Defense slayer, personally. I certainly did that in the last tournament playing Crashbash. Back to your point about Anglemon Surge and Crashbash's body mode ability. Yeah, there was definitely a time where I just swung in to legendaries. I'll make Supreme and then moved all the damage to Countdown and killed him one shot. That felt pretty good, although I did feel bad for Legendary, but I certainly felt pretty good about that.
You didn't feel bad.
But and that deck definitely falls apart without Countdown support, which was always the intention. That, you know, hopefully any deck archetype that I construct as part of Bayformer's work has like Achilles heels and, like, you know, weak spots, because that's good card design, I would think.
Indeed.
But as far as where LLD is now, that whole stratagem and that deck design. And it went through a lot of changes in the course of the alpha and beta. I do recall that a lot of that feedback came from you, Hawk.
Yeah, this was before I joined the server, and then I made that video saying that it was basically Lysander's trump card, and that's how I ended up in this whole mess on the Discord anyways, and now I have regular conversations with the higher-ups at Bayformers and some of the higher-ups at the Arc, so yeah, that happened. But anyways, back to your point.
Yeah, I'm very happy with its current state. Yeah, I'm not putting much work into supporting it because I think it's such a good spot.
Absolutely, I would agree with that.
I feel really good about it.
So yeah, I would absolutely agree with all of that. As somebody who quote unquote despises that card, yeah, it's in a good state. So this was, I think, briefly mentioned earlier when talking about Brian's deck. Untaps, they're huge, and I feel like it's a resource that people aren't valuing correctly. Like, going in, I wasn't thinking at all about untaps. I was just thinking, Unga Bunga, smash this motherfucker in the face. But I feel like untaps, especially with exhaust becoming such a prevalent threat in the meta, they're still huge. But how prevalent are they going to be going forward, and are there going to be uptick in decks that are able to take advantage of them?
I think that's going to rely much more on people's willingness to wrap back around to playing cars. Like, it was also very, very evident in Dutchy's deck how valuable untaps were to his strategy.
Right.
Because, like, he would not have been able to do half the stuff he was doing if I was able to put down a lose the initiative and knock his characters out.
Absolutely.
Like, so... Like that, there's something to be said about just how untaps can change the pace of a game, and like especially in Brian's deck where he's like, oh yeah, Cliffjumper's there just for a draw engine. I have my 8 cards in hand. I'm just gonna let him kill Cliffjumper. Like that kind of strategy is something that you can't get outside of Brave or Stealth unless you're doing untap stuff, which is what cards do. So I don't necessarily think we're going to see like a Ryzen ready for actions or anything like that in future tournaments. Maybe swap missions. But yeah, the importance of the untap is definitely something that came into effect.
Yeah. And
it's very apparent, especially just from the fact that the top 2 scoring decks were cars and cars.
And also, while we're talking about this like Brave and Stealth thing, I made reference to the fact in my Every Card 9 Words or Less video for BFA that Crashbash basically looks at Brave and goes, okay, so... And I feel like if untaps are going to stick around in the format, maybe Crashbash's bot mode actually sees some relevant plays to just say, untaps, no, you, I do whatever I want.
The problem with Crashbash is that, at least right now, his alt mode is dominating the entire scene.
Right.
Because you don't need to flip him to make him good. He just sits in alt mode, hits you for +6 attack, and doesn't need to do much of anything else.
Exactly.
And I feel like that is very much what people are going to do with him. I had a couple moments where I tried to do it with my own deck, which is the kiddie pool deck. If you go to Teletran and see our deck lists. But I tried to do it a couple times, and just because my deck, even though it's like a 16-20 blue-orange split, it never felt like it was hitting the right markers for that, unless I did the one stupid thing, which was throw a handheld blaster on him. He got bold too, and he flipped the right pips, and I moved 2 damage to somebody. And that was the worst feeling thing that I had during the entire tournament. I was like, boy, all of that set up to move 2 damage to a different character.
Yeah.
So, Bill, this isn't really a design question, but just any other thoughts you have on the whole untap situation?
Well, we should first off establish that Cars is, at least in the Bayformers meta, is not the most untap heavy deck archetype.
That's true. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
The
Sharks
most
technically.
untap heavy archetype is by far Sharks.
Yeah.
And
Technically
that's part of the
speaking.
reason why Dutchy's deck has such a problem with Champion's deck, at least in the beginning, is that that deck just does not tap out if it doesn't want to.
That is a fair point. So, if I felt like it died down there a little bit. So let's talk about pip or icon colors. You guys are infecting me with wrong terminology, and I don't like it. But
I call them pips. That's all I've ever called them.
and you, sir, are a moron. But then again, we all are in our own way. So
I
who
am.
cares?
Thank you.
Anyway, so
Me too.
let's talk about orange or
Battle
blue.
icons.
Anyways, but like the context of like orange or blue, like in the Wave 5 meta that lasted way too goddamn long, it was like a Phineas and Ferb summer's worth of just constant orange decks. It was annoying, but now we're starting to see some variants at the very least, and I went through all the decks. 3 of them were orange, 5 of them were blue, and 2 of them were the Viral Special, aka Clown Vomit.
Yep.
God damn it, I'm laughing at that term. But, like, are we starting to see that shift to blue finally happen again? Or are we still going to have, like, a pretty... Or are we going to have, like, I can speak. Are we shifting to blue? Are we going to have a fairly even matchup? Or is this just a temporary swing that'll eventually go back to orange?
Again, this kind of wraps back around to Bill Moo's comment, Bill Moo's comment about whipped into shape. I think that once people really start to wrap their heads around like a super high defense orange build, things might change a little bit. Because an orange deck's ability to block basically everything and then dish it back out is going to be something to be reckoned with. But then, of course, like if you look at what it says are going to be likely to flip for the top like 3 or 4 decks, you have Brian, who his deck is likely to flip 2 blue pips pretty much consistently.
Yeah.
And then Dutchy's is about the same. Mine has a very good chance of flipping or blue and orange. So I was honestly more of a mixed deck than I think I'll freely admit.
I'm not sure if I counted yours as orange or Clown Vomit, but one of the two.
It does predominantly seem to lean blue, so it is kind of on that blue deck lean.
Oh yeah,
so
yours I definitely counted as blue, because I'm looking at the 2 shark decks were what I considered Clown Vomit.
Yeah, I agree with that statement. But yeah, I think that what we're likely to see is kind of much more diversity in meta than just blue or just orange. Because like, especially with characters like Crashbash and Exhaust, who don't necessarily want to lean into a certain pip color, because Crashbash can go mixed very, very happily, and he'll still either get +6 or he'll transfer that damage off to somebody else. So he's very much in that boat of, hey, I can go mixed. And Exhaust is the same. Exhaust is like, well, melee decks like to go mixed already, so you can put me in a mixed deck, and he'll happily work in a mixed deck. So I think that there's still, especially just because this is Encounter 1, I think there's still a lot of room to expand and really work out what orange decks can do with secret actions and what blue decks can do with like the further stuff with brutal conditioning and exhaust and Crashbash and all of this stuff that goes together. So I think that there's a lot of room left to experiment, and it's going to take some time before the meta eventually wraps back around to some really powerful orange decks that can both take it and dish it out.
Right. And Bill, so I think you
like
briefly mentioned this earlier, where like you wanted to, I'm not sure if you did or not, where you wanted to push the meta away from just everything being overly dominant, but not like push it too far into blue. And I think we can see for ourselves that is really the case that is starting to emerge. But do you feel like there's any underlying like additional metrics there that's showing that we might be missing?
I mean, we're still looking at a very early state of the meta.
Right.
Back to Chankener's point. Yeah, there are so many decks that have not been explored yet in a tournament setting, and yeah, I mean, even just listening to Dave and Lee talk yesterday about the wave, and, talking about some of the cards in particular. There's a whole lot of untapped territory.
Right.
Which that's one of the benefits of releasing a very large wave is that, especially with such a lengthy period of testing, is that we're just dipping our toes into the water at this point. I think during the alpha and maybe the earlier part of the beta, we were really dipping into decks that we haven't seen yet post release, and we're hopefully with Encounter 2 and especially Encounter 3 where we return back to a Bayformers only meta. I'm looking forward to seeing some of those decks reemerge. I'm certainly going to be piloting some of them myself. Lose the battle is an orange card. It was designed as a pro attack card, and for me, just giving orange a secret action. That seemed like a very good a good design decision, because if you're going mostly orange, that's kind of counterintuitive in a sense. Why would I play a secret action? I'm not really looking to defend myself. But it provides real value. Putting a grenade launcher in your hand the next turn, you can't argue with that.
Absolutely.
I think there's so much we've still yet to see.
Absolutely. So we're seeing again a shift away from that orange, but something that is sticking around, and we've kind of alluded to this, Titan Masters, especially with Crashbash. Now, the question I have is, again, like a lot of the Wave 5 meta, we saw Sky Shadow dominate, we saw Horrible dominate, we saw Quake dominate, we saw Fangry dominate. Aside from Bill and Tank using those, and also Brian using these Titan Masters, we didn't see any of the big players. Like, there was 0 appearances of Sky Shadow, and is this going to hold true in the future? Like, this also plays into the question of, we're seeing a lot of variety, but is this only due to the fact that everybody is like, ooh, shiny new stuff, let's play with this? Is that effect going to eventually wear off and we return back to something that was more akin to what we saw with Wave 5? Or is this trend going to hold, considering that, again, there's just a lot more options in the format?
I think that right now we're still kind of in the new shiny card phase, and as that sort of moves off, people are going to start going back to some of those old metas. Like, very much with Encounter 2, I think we're going to see a marked increase in the use of Sky Shadow. And that's because right now, one of the more dominant decks in ATP is with their Dark Mount strat, which heals Dark Mount every time he plays an armor. So you can do Dark Mount with a toolbox and then play a cooling vents on him and heal for 4. And that's that. So I think that right now we're still kind of in the new shiny card phase, and we're kind of working things out. I think that the best example of kind of clashing old with new is really, or like how older decks kind of fare in the current meta, is Dutchy's deck. Because Dutchy only included, where did it go? What is the card? Open Agenda. That is his only real inclusion from BFA.
And also Give Me Your Face and Lose the Battle in the sideboard as well, so.
Right, but those are in the sideboard.
Yeah.
And he never had, I would venture he never had to pull those out.
I don't think so.
Exactly. So, in the grand scope of things, I think that that's kind of the first initial point of, hey, this is how an older deck is going to fare in the meta, and it came second place. And with how different ATP's power level is kind of creeping compared to a lot of the other fan sets like Arc and Bayformers and Wave X, it's going to be something, certainly, to see like Sky Shadow come in and watch him do his thing against an all Bayformers deck. Or like, how is Sky Shadow going to fare against I have a feeling I can have a couple guesses based on the fact that, oh, you've killed Sky Shadow. Let me just yeet Countdown with a 3 damage burst. But yeah, we'll see with that.
Yeah, I did do some testing against Sky Shadow, I think, when I was prepping for this event, and the matchup seemed fairly favorable, at least for me, but we'll see how other people pilot it. And, Bill, do you have anything that you want to add to this?
I mean, both Sky Shadow and Sky Perceptor for me are like old friends that I really actually want to kill in an alley.
That's dark.
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
got a life insurance policy on you.
They're like, they're like second cousins that want to repossess my house, but they're still family, so I still love them.
Well, I mean, you get to heal 2 damage if you do that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I said, there's a deep familiarity there. Yeah, we tested against those decks heavily.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, Sky Shadow definitely has its match in lots of BFA archetypes, but I never wanted to take the power out of them entirely. I just wanted to make them competitive.
Absolutely.
And that was, we definitely arrived at that point. Now, just, you know, ATP definitely throws lots of variables into the mix, but a lot of those we've already seen. We play with ATP very heavily on this server. So, I expect we'll see some surprising results, but they won't be entirely out of left field. Obviously, ATP3 does introduce new factors, and we're yet to see the full. But it's going to be an interesting environment, and we will see what they arrive with.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's really all the major points I wanted to hit on. There's a couple of smaller ones that I want to mention, and let's just try to lightning round this, because I just noticed this has been going for 1 hour and 18 minutes. I was expecting this to be a half-hour video. So let's just quickly rail off a few things, just give a few thoughts. First off, Grenade Launcher. I saw this in the Eye of the Matrix Arc event, that Grenade Launcher was still up there with Fusion Boar, but it seemed to have dropped off in BFA-only formats. Your thoughts?
Fusion Boar. That's really my only thought. The guaranteed 3 damage, especially because, again, we kind of, at least from like our testing before games, we kind of predicted a more blue-heavy environment. So it makes a lot of sense that Fusion Boar is sticking around, because in an unfamiliar environment, Fusion Boar is going to be much more beneficial to you.
That's a fair point, exactly. Bill, I know you were an advocate of this one when you were trying to tell me how to beat. There's enough small boys floating around for Tripwire to be good, because like just going through the stuff in that won the event, we saw Dead End show up in the Daring Escape deck. Screw that thing. We saw Shark show up twice. You were playing Top Shot. I was using Countdown. So was Legendary. There's a lot more smaller boys, and do you think we start to see an uptick in Tripwire play in the sideboard, or something else with Tripwire?
Yeah, I was running 3.
So, yeah, okay. Energon Axe, I think we can all agree on this. It's still everywhere. It ain't going anywhere.
I don't think it will.
Yeah.
No, Energon Axe is never going to leave. We cannot escape Energon Axe. It's too easy to get down. It's too easy to play. You're never going to get rid of Energon Axe.
Yeah, there's a reason I said it was the best battle card in the game. Speaking of Energon Axe, I've also noticed that the Sharks decks were running, I think one of them was running Soldier's Blaster. I'm not sure about the other, but there are some weapons that are starting to show up that don't just instantly fall off. So do you think we start seeing an uptick in Enforcement Batons in the sideboard to counter it?
That's a hard question. Just because like Reprocess is still floating around, Sabotage Armaments is still floating around, so I can't necessarily say yes or no.
Yeah. So there.
I personally hope so, because Enforcement Batons. I'm personally a fan of that card. I think it's a great card.
It's a good card.
Yeah.
Like I'm not ideologically opposed to that card. Like I play that card a lot.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit more touchy about Bashing Shield. Yeah.
Alrighty, so
I certainly hope so.
Yeah, moving on to counter espionage. We've seen Turnabout Snare see an uptick in play. We've seen Tetranite see this heavy amount of play. We've been talking about Lose the Battle. We've been talking about Whipped into Shape. I think that counter espionage now more than ever is important, but any objections to that in regards to like the saturation of secret actions that we're seeing right now?
Hey Hawk, is that a turnabout snare you've played?
I should have seen that coming. God damn it. Yeah, I'm just gonna give this advice to everybody: play multiple secret actions. Don't telegraph your play. I overuse turnabout snare, I will admit. But back to the question at hand: is there gonna be a problem with counter espionage and having all this oversaturation of secret actions? Or you still think it's gonna stay at roughly the same power level? It's just gonna see a higher frequency of play in main decks potentially.
I think that it and espionage both, you gotta have at least one. So I think that, like, I think I was dumb. I didn't play either in my deck.
Same.
So, like, when I was facing down or facing the barrel of the gun that is Daring Escape, I was like, I have no counters to this other than to try and smack your characters off the board. So I think that there's always going to be a place for counter espionage and espionage, especially counter espionage, considering the fact that BFA has introduced, in my opinion, some of the most game-changing secret actions. Like, Turnabout Snare is very, very good, and if you can counter-espionage it off the board and out of their hand, then that's a big deal.
Absolutely.
Tetranite is not as worrying, but yeah.
Yeah. Bill, were you going to say something?
I'm a big fan of counter-espionage and espionage play and just general, any sort of, I love counterplay. And, I see it as a good thing if those cards get played more.
Absolutely. So then while we're talking about the sideboard, I've kind of compiled a list of things that I think are going to be go-to sideboard options going forward. And we've talked about espionage and counter-espionage. Spy-Sat Uplink, I feel like could start to see some play, especially with again serving as that equalizer, but there are still probably going to be some Brave and Stealth shenanigans running around, let's be real. Tripwire for the small dudes. Disarm, this was something that I feel like, Tank, you were playing 2 copies of Disarm, if I recall correctly, and you didn't get to those?
I was playing 2 copies of Disarm in my main board, not in my sideboard.
Yeah, but you were still playing 2 copies, and you weren't able to access them, and that was a pretty significant factor in regards to being able to to eliminate Omega, because without his Ghost Shield, he's pretty weak. Well, Brian was able to disarm fairly quickly, and I don't think disarm is going to be favorable in every matchup. Like, I feel like there are some other ones where, like, your opponent is just playing 1 weapon a turn, like, possibly against, like, cars and stuff like that, like the Crashbash Exhaust. I feel like it's going to be less potent against those because they aren't spamming upgrades as much that need to stick. But against stuff like last-sided defense and Sharks, I feel like it'll be a little better just because they tend to stack upgrades and also have upgrade protection in the case of last line. But Tank, you were saying?
I will very directly tell you that there is a matchup that Disarm does not work with, and it is disarming the aspect off of a Quintesson, and then they play it again the next turn. I had to learn that doing it twice in a row against Mega Klutz, and I was like, wait, he's untapping every turn, and he's healing every turn. How's he doing that? And I was like, it's the aspect, isn't it? I disarmed that twice. Like, my brain, I had to put all the puzzle pieces together because I was too dumb and I haven't played Quintessons.
Yeah. And I feel like that's why disarm should be more of a sideboard staple, because again, it's not going to be favorable in every matchup, and in some cases it's going to actively be screwing you over. But in the matchups that it's good in, you're going to be wanting to pull it in. And finally, this is one that I've added in simply because of the Sharktacon prevalence. What lies beyond? Like, if Peace Through Tyranny sticks around and people can KO their Sharks to gain extra turns, maybe this starts to see an uptick in play. That could be just a pipe dream on my part because I tend to overlook into things. So.
Well, first, you can't use PTT on Sharks because they don't have the start count.
Okay, so that point is actually irrelevant. Never mind. Okay, so the what lies beyond argument, and I'm not even going to insert a gag here because frankly I'm getting kind of tired of editing this thing. But what lies beyond works when an enemy returns from the battlefield, or returns to the battlefield from the KO area, or is KO'd by an opponent's card without doing damage to it. So what lies beyond is still decent against Sharks because Pit of Judgment is bringing back Sharks from the KO area. You're getting extra damage onto likely the Judge. You tap a Shark so you prevent them from getting an extra hit in and kind of you strip them of one of their main strengths, which is coming back untapped. And so if Sharks become prevalent, what lies beyond is an option. Back to the discussion. Let's move on.
Good job.
Again, this is why I brought other people in, so that way I don't miss like this. Anyway,
Good
so we've talked a lot about the state of the game directly after this event. Let's look ahead to future events. So Encounter 3 is the next BFA only event. What do you think we're going to be seeing out of that? Do you still think we're going to see some consistency? Are there any cards you think could come out of nowhere to directly challenge what we've seen out of this meta so far? Or is there anything else you want to talk about in regards to how the meta will advance?
I think that, well, first off, we're going to have a lot more players because we're going to get a lot of the influx of players from ATP. They're gonna discover that, playing in these tournaments is pretty cool. They're going to want to continue. Discover new cards because, new cards are fun.
Exactly.
And I figure that probably we'll see, new players is always good. A lot of people net deck when they go into a tournament for the first time. New environment. So I figure that probably about half of the decks in Encounter 3 will be legacy decks or revamped versions of those decks. And I think the other half...
I can't wait until somebody net decks my deck, and I'm like, haha, that's garbage.
Watching somebody net
did get
decks...
third.
I was
It did get
waiting...
third.
What was that? Bill, what did you
It
say?
did get third, so it can't be garbage.
Yeah. Watching somebody net decks it just gets completely lost, and then I show up like, you have no idea what this card has gone through. I'm never going to stop talking about that. But yeah, that I feel is a reasonable expectation. I thought there wasn't going to be too much changing, but there is going to be at least some developments from the people who are veterans of this format. And we've hinted at this a little bit throughout the video. Encounter 2 with ATP. We've talked about how Dark Sky Shadows might come in with Dark Mountain, possibly wreck some. Is there anything in ATP in particular that you think is going to show up? And before we actually go on this question, I know, Bill, you were talking about banning Here's the Thing and I Don't Believe in Destiny. Now, you've explained that reasoning to us, but for those of for all the viewers, do you mind explaining why you're making those choices?
Well, a lot of those choices on the ban list, there's two things I keep in mind. One of them is existing ban lists, that are maintained by, the other team, in this case, ATP. And, ATP has already made, ATP is always going to have the most experience playing their own cards. And so they won't be, arriving to these decisions lightly. I mean, they put these cards on their ban list, they put cards on their ban list because they play them. Some of these cards they created, and that's never, that's never an easy decision to make. To put cards on your own ban list that you've created yourself, but they've done them for certain cards, and so I'm gonna listen to their judgment. So that's one factor. Always listening to another group's decisions on ban lists. The second is crossplay. What may work, in one environment where it's only one card, one group's cards in play. In crossplay, you may see all sorts of unfavorable interactions because you have different groups trying to solve problems in their own way, and you may see where things sort of pile up upon one another trying to solve a problem, and it could lead to a degenerate effect. So we might put a stratagem or battle card on the list because one, we want to sort of favor our own cards, and we certainly hope that if other groups have their own crossplay tournaments, they would also make their own biased ban lists that favor their own cards. We might do that just to sort of minimize those unfavorable interactions. So that's the decision making that we make as far as cards going on a ban list.
Alrighty, yeah. Me and Tank knew that, but I just wanted everybody at home to hear that as well. And let's talk about a bit more of the gameplay aspect. Again, I've mentioned Sky Shadow with Dark Mount, Dinobots is mentioned, but are there any cards that you guys in particular are seeing from ATP, pretty much all the ATP stuff, that you think could come in and potentially have some sort of an impact on what's going on over here?
ATP 3, Ransack, and Overlord. Both of them because they can potentially add an absurd number of star cards to your deck, especially Overlord.
Yeah, and also, if we're talking about star cards, Red Wizard, he likes to play star cards, so that could potentially be something that shows up. Another thing that I've been thinking about is Drift. He plays into the melee strategy that BFA wants to. He could come in as a serious challenger alongside the cards we've been seeing with Exhaust.
That is also a very high possibility.
Yeah.
A certain someone, names not being named, has already been testing Drift in an ATP environment.
Or ATP BFA, you mean?
ATP BFA environment, yes. But I'm interested in seeing, just because of the evolution of Skybolt and Sky Scepter, Skybash or Crash Shadow. I don't know how you'd want to go about that one. But Skybolt or
let's call it Shadow in the Ocean.
Shadow in the Ocean. But yeah, the possibility of Crashbash and Sky Shadow and how those would interact, that seems interesting to me, to say the least. I started brewing up an Exhaust and Sky Shadow kind of crossplay, and I'm still kind of debating on whether that has anywhere left to go or if the list that I had is just doo-doo. So we'll see with that. But,
I do think that Red Wizard is a sleeper because,
oh yeah,
I think any deck that is more easily able to get star cards in hand. The sort of mitigating condition for Red Wizard and his bot mode power is that you're not going to get that many star cards in your hand. You get maybe 3, if that, during for one shuffle. Even though he does have ways to pull them out of the scrap pile, but at the same time, that's what limits his power is the frequency of star cards. And if there's a HP archetype that more readily gets those star cards in hand, I can see that being degenerate.
Yeah, and again, we haven't really tested this, so this is something that I guess the tournament will actually show us. Like, there's some stuff that we can kind of see ahead of time. Like, here's the thing being paired with all, like, Turnabout Snare to an extent, and definitely Tetranite. That's a problem, getting shut down. Red Wizard mixed with Overlord, that's something that we'll see. So, I'm trying to think, is there anything... Heed the Call might be interesting with Sharkticons running around, but that's just some random note that I just thought of, so...
Snapdragon is an is he an anti-Sharkticon tool? I'm trying to remember.
I think we had some discussions about how, I don't think, Pit of Judgment works, or Snapdragon works against Pit of Judgment. We know it shuts down what was it? I Still Function, but we're talking about how it doesn't shut down Involuntary Promotion and how it doesn't shut down Pit of Judgment as a result. Bill, I think, was it you that mentioned that, or was that Techno?
I think that was Techno.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that was that. So I'm just trying to think, is there anything else out of ATP in particular? Any ATP veterans who are thinking about playing in the BFA event or are just, analyzing the BFA cards? Let us know down in the comments what you think. Are there any particular cards out of ATP that you think are going to come in here and kind of just shake things up, shake up what we've been talking about? So... yeah, I think that's really everything I wanted to talk about. Is there any additional notes you guys wanted to add in at the end here quickly?
I mean, my additional note is, just join us in the Bayformers Discord. Like, play on Tabletop Simulator. Like, we do it so often.
Very often.
We're constantly playing.
Also, you might get swag for it. Not going to say anything in particular, but... Bill, I might need to nab a link for you for the Discord so I can throw it in the description if that's okay with you.
Sure thing.
Alrighty, so, with that being said, I was expecting this video to be a half an hour. It's an hour and a half. My biggest fear with this video was that the conversation wasn't going to go for long enough, but obviously it went long enough, so this is going to be interesting to edit, but it's mostly just going to be putting in cards in Premiere, so... that'll be easy to do. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining me here for this discussion. Hopefully we'll be back here again discussing how ATP shook things up. Hopefully we'll be back here and not discussing how Sky Shadow is breaking the format. And to all of you at home, thank you very much for sticking through this marathon of a video. I think this is actually one of the longer ones. I know the Kingdom Death episode, or one of them, was a slog fest, and so was the Omega Supreme Files. These longer videos aren't going to happen too often. I mean... honestly, now that I think about it, they're kind of innately going to happen a lot on here, but whatever, it's my channel. As long as I'm not being offensive, I can do whatever I want. So, yeah, that's really everything that I think all of us have to say. Again, join us in the Bayformers Discord. Shenanigans happen, and you might get some swag if you play enough games, but also playing games is a fun thing. So, yeah, link in the description to that. Link in the description to the deck list, the 8 out of the 10 of them, if you want to check them out for yourself. So, or if you want to analyze them and try to figure out what you're going to come in and probably kick my butt with. And, yeah, I think that's everything I have to say. So that will do it for this video. Peace out, y'all.
Bye.
Bye. There's no Titan class character in BFB.
Lies!